Hello and welcome to this Cloud Academy webinar on preparing for the AWS Specialty Certification and beyond. Now, my name is Andrew Larkin and I'm here with Stuart Scott, and here's a high-level agenda of what we are going to cover today. So, first of all, let's look at an overview of the certification so we're clear on what it is and what it isn't. We'll look at the benefits that can be gained from achieving the specialty certification, which I think is important. I'm going to talk a bit about our experiences with the certification, and we'd like to share our personal views on it as well as help you get prepared for learning the content you need for this and preparing for the exam. We'll talk through the domains, so Stuart's going to give us a good view of what's in our learning path and how that can help you prepare. And we'll also look at the study plan for how you can start getting ready for this wonderful certification. And then we're going to give you some tips on perhaps what you should do, what you could do, and in what our view you must do if you want to be successful with this exam. We'll look at some exam tips, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. All right, so let's get a quick start on an overview of this certification. So it was released in the 23rd of April 2018. There was a beta release which many of us sat at reInvent 2017. But the scope of the exam has been refined and narrowed since that first release. So the exam is designed to demonstrate and validate your knowledge of how to secure AWS environments using a variety of different security mechanisms. The topics focus well, quite narrow. So they focus on incident response, logging and monitoring, infrastructure security, identity and access management, and data protection. Now, a prerequisite to take the exam is you need to have either the cloud practitioner or an associate level certification first. So you need to have passed one of those first, but it can be any one of the associate certs. And we have learning paths for the associate learning paths if you need to get started in one of those first. Now, this security specialty exam is a professional level exam, so it's 3 hours long. The cost of sitting it is $300 US, so it's quite a large investment in time and money, which you need to pay to the AWS training provider before you take it. You can't take anything into the exam room with you, and the questions are mainly multi-choice or are multi-choice with either single answers or also multi-option answers, which can be quite challenging. So it's well worth being as prepared as possible for this exam. Right, so why would you want to do this certification, and what are the benefits in achieving this specialty certification to you? Well, first, there is no more important topic to master. Security is crucial to all cloud use cases, and the AWS certification provides a reputable benchmark for anyone adopting AWS in their organization, now or in the future. So second, it's the recognition that goes with the certification. It provides an objective, recognizable way for you and your organization to demonstrate your credibility in cloud security. Remember, this is not an option. Cloud security is the #1 concern of most of the cloud providers, and you would have heard AWS talking about this in market a lot, how security is not an option, it's the #1 priority for the business. So it's very important that we as practitioners are able to emulate that thinking. We need to be across all of the certification and security requirements so that we can show customers, partners, and our own businesses that we're able to practice best practices and ensure that our environment stays secure. I think thirdly, consistency is a really big benefit. So if everyone's using a common security process and language, it helps teams share and follow best practices when discussing and implementing security services. And fourth, for me, this certificate demonstrates your professional credibility in this key area of cloud services. It's a valued and respected certification in the AWS ecosystem, and I personally recommend you consider investing time in passing this one. All right? Security is not going to go out of fashion. And fifth, as a professional certification, the security specialty counts towards the AWS Partner Certification Program and competency requirements. So if you're in a partner or a business that's looking to keep a certain tier or competency, it counts towards those very important points. Okay, so let's delve into this certification in a bit more detail. So my team live and breathe the AWS certifications, and we regularly put our bodies on the line so that we can help you learn the right content and to help you prepare for passing the certification exams. So let me share a few common threads that I see in this exam curriculum and some of the observations I have from my own experiences with this certification. So first off, I thought this certification is harder than the associate level certifications, but I didn't think it was as difficult as the solution architect professional or the DevOps professional, for example. The questions weren't as long and there's less information to process in the scenarios. However, there appeared to be a minimal overlap from the other certifications. So you need to know security at a deep level. There's no avoiding the fact that you need to be adequately prepared for this certification. It's not one I think you can just walk into and hope to pass, okay? I felt there's adequate time in the exam itself to complete the questions, which is perhaps a little different from the other professional certs where you really are time poor and you have roughly 3 minutes per question to answer and assimilate a lot of information to answer the questions correctly. But the questions for the security certification exam I thought were difficult to answer, and often the options presented appeared very similar. So you really need to quickly narrow down your options to relevant ones, remove the ones that obviously aren't correct, and make an evaluation of those which are the best solution for the best use cases described. So not easy. And I think some of the less well-known services were covered in some specific detail, things such as Amazon KMS and the AWS Inspector, for example. So you need to be able to recognize and implement key management services in AWS, know the various types of KMS support available, and having a good working knowledge of AWS Cloud HSM and services of that nature. So if you have a good understanding of how to configure Cloud HSM, understand the AWS Cloud HSM architecture and the integration options, things such as Cloud HSM runs on SafeNet Lunar appliances, what is required to provision them, and roughly what the monthly costs might be using Cloud HSM. Things like that can be quite useful. Okay, so that's my sort of high-level observations. Now, I'm just going to give you a few of my own technical observations with this, and then I'm going to pass over to Stuart, who's going to walk into this in a bit more detail for us. So first off, it's really important that you know how to recognize and explain the difference between security groups and network access control lists, and when and how to use either. The security group operates at the instance level, so it's your first layer of defense. The network access control list operates at the subnet level, so it acts as a second layer of defense. Security groups support allow rules only, network ACL support allow rules and deny rules. The security group is stateful, and return traffic is automatically allowed, regardless of any other rules the network ACL has put in place. As a network ACL is stateless, so return traffic must be explicitly allowed by your rules. Make sure you brush up on those. Security groups are evaluated before deciding whether to allow traffic, all right? Whereas with network ACLs or NACLs, rules are processed in a numerical order. So you can only set allow rules for security groups. So allowing an IP address or an IP address range to access your VPC using a specified service port to a defined IP destination. You can't use a security group to set a deny rule, something that seems to catch a lot of people out. So network ACLs can be used to provide a temporary attack mitigation strategy, e.g. for blocking an attack site IP address or IP range, but underscore the word temporary, okay? It's not going to provide a long-term solution. It might provide you with a simple solution. Which brings me to my second observation. You need to be able to recognize and explain the common attack patterns and mitigation strategies available, all right? If you want to implement a scalable solution for blocking unwanted traffic, you need to consider one of the AWS managed services, such as AWS WAF, AWS Shield, AWS Macie even, and or implementing an IDS or IPS solution. Now remember that EC2 instances cannot be run in stealth or promiscuous mode in the VPC, all right? So AWS security devices do not allow an instance to run with any other IP or MAC address other than the one assigned by the hypervisor. Slightly different from how you might do it in the data center. So remember that intrusion detection and intrusion prevention have unique requirements, and so can or may be provided by a blend of services. So it helps to be familiar with some of the partner AWS services available in the AWS marketplace, as well as the AWS core services available. And I think it helps to keep in mind that design considerations may need to be made based on business priorities and or time constraints, something that seemed to crop up a lot in my opinion. So read the questions very carefully and always try to use managed services as much as possible in any given scenario. And make sure that you are clear on the various use cases for each and when you might use one service over another. So, third, I think you need to be well versed in the practical aspects of the AWS shared security model, i.e. understand how customer data is wiped from EBS volumes, for example. What are the steps you would take to disable a user or temporary credentials from a role if a system was compromised? Really think about the practical use cases of the shared security model. You need to be familiar with single sign-on or using token-based security or using security-based tokens like SDS. How would you set up federated identity with simple token service or Amazon Cognito? And how you might go about restricting access to corporate services using something like a custom time to live value, for example. And fourth, you need to know the various monitoring services AWS provides, right? There's a good fleet of monitoring services there at your command, and when to use them for compliance reporting and management. So remember, AWS CloudWatch monitors service activity. AWS CloudTrail monitors API calls and requests. AWS Config monitors and reports on changes to your environment and users, which is very useful for PCI, SOC compliance, and HIPAA compliance reports, for example. You also have VPC flow logs, which are an additional feature that can really help with compliance reporting, as essentially it allows you to monitor changes within the VPC. All very useful. So fifth, and hopefully finally, I did have a long history with this exam. I've watched it develop, and there are many areas that I think it's worthwhile delving into and ensuring you're prepared for. But fundamentally, I think the key one is to just know how to reduce attack surface areas and to implement network layer defense to mitigate things like man-in-the-middle attacks, right? Be able to recognize and explain DDoS attack prevention strategies in AWS and the steps you can take to reduce the impact of a DDoS attack on your VPC. You need to understand and be able to identify the benefits of things like the Elastic Load Balancer and AWS WAF in mitigating DDoS type attacks, and how CloudWatch alarms and AWS CloudWatch logs can help you identify and mitigate network attacks. Okay, so that's my personal observations. I hope that helps with framing it. Now let's get into some real technical detail. So now I'd like to hand over and introduce Stuart Scott, who is our AWS lead at Cloud Academy. And as well as being our lead in the AWS practice, Stuart has significant experience in cloud security. Before joining Cloud Academy, Stuart was voted the most valuable contributor on expertexchange.com. And in the 2 years I've had the pleasure of working with Stuart, he's been growing his prominence in the security community. He's often quoted in blogs and articles like the ones you can see on the screen. And one of my favorites is the evangelist at AWS, Jeff Barr, who you may or may not know of. Jeff is quite a prominent figure in the AWS community. Jeff has always been very impressed by Stuart's comments and articles and some of his great assets in simplifying security for our users. So, Stuart, can I hand over to you?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction there, Andy. You made some really good points in your details just then, specifically relating to understanding each of the security services. That's fundamental before taking this exam, is to really know the differences between the different security services and the different security features within all of the AWS services, really, because it covers, excuse me, not just the security service itself, but the different mechanisms and fundamentals of security that are based within each of these services. So I just want to run through some of the domains of the exam, and there's 5 domains. So the first domain is incident response, and this takes up 12% of your final markings of the exam. Domain 2 relates to logging and monitoring, and this is 20% of your final mark. The third domain is the largest of the domain, which is 26%, and this relates to infrastructure security. In a moment, I'm going to break down each of these domains further to identify exactly what they expect you to know within each of these domains. So the fourth domain, that is identity and access management, and that equates to 20%. And the final domain is data protection. So here we're going to look at encryption, etc. So the first domain, incident response, there's a number of points on this. I think there's 3 different elements. So the first point within incident response is the point is, given an AWS abuse notice, evaluate the suspected compromised instance or exposed access keys. So what they're asking you to understand and know here is how to effectively isolate the resource should it be compromised. And you'll need to understand how to investigate the logs. You might need to rotate the access keys or change passwords. And when you're isolating the instance, you'll need to understand how to do that. So how to isolate it from all your other resources within your VPC. So you'll need to update your security groups, maybe your NACLs as well, and remove all access to that instance, apart from one host that can run some forensic analysis on that device to understand why it was compromised. So you totally isolate it apart from one instance. So you need to understand how to do that and how to modify those security groups.
Yeah, that seemed to be quite a focus, didn't it, Stu? I mean, I found myself, having to really think hard about all of the steps that you need to do that full isolation for those type of scenarios.
That's right, and I think there was a few points about that where you had to select multiple options in kind of understanding that process.
Yeah, very good. It really tested your knowledge, which is great because preparing for the certification really gives you that almost autonomous reaction to how to solve these problems and deal with these situations, which is why it's, I think, a very good certification.
Agreed. Okay, the second point, you need to verify that the incident response plan includes relevant AWS services. So here, this is where it comes into good knowledge that you understand your security services. You need to understand which services you could use in this instance. So you might want to use AWS CloudTrail for auditing. You might want to use AWS Config, which Andy mentioned earlier, to monitor any resource changes that might have happened recently. And one of the key services that comes up a lot in the exam is Identity and Access Management, IAM. And you'll need to understand how to use this to rotate your access keys and passwords. The final point in incident response is to evaluate the configuration of automated alerting and execute possible remediation of security-related incidents and emerging issues. So basically here, you really need to understand how to monitor and understand the alerting around logs and incidents. So you need to understand your CloudWatch logs and how to manage CloudWatch logs log groups and with metric filters to understand exactly what's happening within your logs and alert against specific metrics. And you need to understand how to refine your different security measures that you have within your environment. So perhaps refine your IAM policies if they've been a little bit too lax. You might want to introduce multi-factor authentication if you have a number of identities that have high access to your resources but need that extra level of authorization authentication. You might want to review your NACLs if there's too much traffic getting through to subnets that shouldn't be, and also your security groups as well. So it's understanding how to remediate issues when there is an instance to prevent it from happening again. And that's all about refining your security measures. So moving on to the second domain with regards to logging and monitoring. The first point here is to design and implement security monitoring and alerting. And again, you really need to understand the services that you could use behind this. So you could use Amazon Inspector to check for vulnerabilities on your EC2 instances. You can use Trusted Advisor to look at some of the security best practices that's within your environment to see if there's any improvements that can be made there. You could use a service such as Amazon Guard Duty or Amazon Macie, which are both backed by machine learning. Andy mentioned earlier the web application firewall to help protect your web applications from DDoS attacks or SQL injections, and also how to configure SNS for notification throughout the use of all of these services. The second point relates to troubleshooting. So here, this is where you really need to understand how the service itself is put together and how you configure it, because you need to understand how it works and how it's configured to be able to troubleshoot the issues. So, for example, if you was using Amazon Inspector, you want to check that the agent installation was configured correctly and it was successful. So it's quite a detailed element, this is, but it's just about understanding how the services are configured, just to make sure you've got all the right points in place, all the permissions are set up correctly. So that's it's a tricky one. Troubleshooting does come up a lot in each of the domains, and I did get quite a lot of questions on how to troubleshoot a particular issue, and I think it's just trying to test that you understand the methodology behind it. Would you agree, Andy?
Yeah, it really puts you on the edge. I felt like I was on the edge of my knowledge of a lot of the services. Just if you haven't been using them regularly, you'll find yourself going, "Ugh." So what we recommend is try and do as many of the labs as we have in the learning path, because if you haven't had hands-on experience with some of these services, the labs will give you that. And it makes a wealth of difference if you're just more familiar with, how to configure, how to set up, because this exam is designed to test your knowledge. All right, it's not a walk in the park at all.
Certainly not. Okay, the third point: design and implement a logging solution. We have a few courses on this within our learning path that we'll come to later. There's numerous methods of logging that you can set up within AWS. For example, CloudFront access logs, S3 access logs. Andy mentioned flow logs earlier for your VPC, CloudTrail logs. So it's depending on what the question is, you need to select the appropriate logging solution using the correct services. So again, it's just understanding how to log within AWS and the different options that are available.
Yeah.
The fourth thing, sorry, Andy.
Yeah, I was just thinking that sort of granularity on the use cases. So, when would you use VPC flow logs? Just thinking through what the actual benefit of each of the services are and how you can combine them together to get the best result based on the scenario that you're given, which is very real world. And I think that's, again, the more experience you have with the products, the better you'll be able to answer these questions.
Definitely, and logging is such a key component within security. Being able to have the data to analyze to identify exactly what is going on within your environment is key.
Yeah.
And the final point in logging and monitoring is, again, troubleshooting your login solutions. So again, this might be largely down to permissions. A service might not have the correct permissions to write to a particular log file. There could be an error in a policy where the syntax isn't quite correct. So you need to really understand how to create your different policies and the syntax around that. You might need to check that the correct log groups are being used within CloudWatch. So again, it's just about understanding how to configure the solution and the process behind it and the prerequisites of those solutions as well with regards to logging.
Mm-hmm.
So the third domain is infrastructure security, and this is a domain that I find that most people have experience with, because everyone who's kind of familiar with AWS has had some involvement with VPCs and configuring them and creating them. So the first point here is design edge security on AWS. And here it's talking about the services that are on the very edge of the network, so kind of almost outside of your VPC. So we're talking about CloudFront here. So you need to understand how to configure CloudFront access logs, how to set up different origins for your distributions, and also different access identities as well that CloudFront can use. Also, services such as WAF and Shield. We mentioned earlier about DDoS mitigation and SQL injection attacks, how to prevent those and how to set up those systems. The second point within infrastructure security relates to how to define a secure network infrastructure. And this is largely around your VPC security. So how to set up your different subnets in a public and private scenario, how to configure your routing properly and the association of your route tables to different subnets, ensuring you understand the differences between NACLs and security groups, which Andy mentioned earlier, which is very key. And also elements such as where to put a bastion host and when to use a bastion host, and also your NAT gateways as well. So have a really strong understanding of your VPC security there.
Yep. Also VPN access, VPC peering. Understand the difference with direct connect over VPN. Sorry. There's a couple of good networking courses in our library if you feel a little bit under prepared for infrastructure security. I mean, we kind of assume most people have good experience with this because most of us come from that background, right? But not everybody. So if you are new to network security, like TCP IP networking, then I recommend doing some of those networking courses that are part of our library, just so that you're familiar with how to do that.
Okay, the third point, again, relating to troubleshooting. Like I said, it kind of comes up in most of the domains. So you need to understand how to troubleshoot your VPC security. You might need to look for missing routes. There might be an issue with the NACLs. Remember, they're stateless, so you might need to look at the return traffic. You might need to add a rule in there. You might need to check to make sure you've got an internet gateway configured and that there's a route to it if there's communication issues. And also just make sure the right ports are being used in the security group. So have a working knowledge of some of the common ports, for example, SSH, RDP, HTTP, etc. Just have a knowledge of some of those common protocols that are used, because you might come across a question where they've added the wrong protocol port. So you need to understand which one's which. And the final point is to design and implement host-based security. And here you could come across a situation where you might be using a host-based IDS for extra layer of security on your EC2 instance, which can then push logs to CloudWatch perhaps, or it could be relating to Amazon Inspector, which offers host level protection, which looks for a multitude of vulnerabilities on the EC2 instance. The fourth domain is relating to identity and access management. And this comes up quite a lot because it's interwoven with a number of different other services. So you need to be able to design and implement a scalable authorization and authentication system to access AWS resources. And Andy mentioned here earlier with regards to federated access. Most of us have probably used IAM and know how to configure users, groups, etc. You need to have a solid understanding of roles, but you also need to understand how to authorize access for accounts that exist outside of your environment. And this is through federated access. And this can either be from an enterprise perspective, so you might federate your Active Directory users that you currently have on premise, and how to use those accounts to authorize access to your AWS resources. Or you could use web identity providers such as Facebook. So you could use your Facebook account to authorize your access. So it's understanding how those methods of authentication and access work. And the second point within IAM is how to troubleshoot an authentication system again. So again, we have troubleshooting, and things to look out for in this area is to check the policies. I mentioned it a few moments ago, but you really need to have a solid understanding on how to create and build IAM policies. Not just IAM policies, but also S3 bucket policies, perhaps KMS key management policies as well. So there's a number of different policies that you need to understand. Also multi-factor authentication, how that works, how to set up and configure your access keys, and also something that come up for me, or something they certainly check for, is you need to check for any explicit denies in any policies. So if someone can't access a particular resource and they might have full access to that particular resource, then you check another policy and there's an explicit deny there, remember that your explicit deny will always overrule any allow. So just look out for little things like that.
A classic one. Yeah.
Definitely. So the final domain is data protection. The first point is to design and implement key management and use case. So here we're looking at KMS, which is the key management service. You need to understand how it works, the different components of KMS, the different services that it can integrate with, and also IAM and access keys again here. This kind of falls under this element as well. The second point on data protection is troubleshooting again. So troubleshooting key management. I mentioned a moment ago key policies within KMS. You definitely need to understand how these key policies work, how to delete keys, how to disable keys, how to rotate them, because all these configuration elements in key management play a part in the troubleshooting.
Yeah, they definitely took me to the edge of my knowledge with KMS and Cloud HSM. So again, I think you really need to make sure you double down on learning everything you can about those services. You know, they tend to crop up in most exam curriculums, right? But here you're really being asked as if you were a practitioner. So you really need to know how you actually manage these in the field, right? And it's not something you can kind of bluff your way through. So well worth doing these two great courses in the learning path on this, and they'll help you with that knowledge.
Yeah, I agree, Andy. I mean, a lot of people have heard of KMS and might use it within a service just via a checkbox, for example, to say, yes, use KMS key to encrypt my data here. But it's understanding that back-end process of how that works, how that key is managed, and the policies behind that.
Yeah, migrating keys to AWS is another good one. You know, how you store them. If you have been using an appliance outside of AWS, then that's where Cloud HSM can provide a good solution. If it's based on any of the SafeNet Luna appliances, then it's going to make a good temporary way of you importing keys. But again, like the cost of running Cloud HSM as an appliance, it's quite an expensive service because you're basically hiring this piece of hardware. So I don't have the exact numbers. You need to check on the AWS site for the exact numbers, but from my reference, it was around 10K a month to use a Cloud HSM device. So ultimately, you probably want to be looking at ways of migrating off that in the long term because you could save money doing it in a more operationally efficient way with the other AWS tools available. Things like that.
And the final point is to design and implement a data encryption solution for data at rest and data in transit. So this point looks at services that aren't necessarily security services as such, but it's services that include an encryption option, such as S3, where you have server-side encryption or client-side encryption, and maybe your EBS encryption and RDS encryption. So you need to understand the different encryption types, how they work, and when you'd use one over the other.
Yeah.
So that's a rundown of the 5 domains and the points with each of them. So we have developed a security learning path here at Cloud Academy that covers all of these domains, all of the services that crop up, and we go into quite a lot of detail on how these are configured, how they're run, and how they're put together. So the learning path is about 28 hours long, I think, at the moment, and it's broken down into a number of sections. So the first section will look at identity and access management and authentication authorization. So if we look at this example here of the first course, which is IAM, which is a key and fundamental component of the security exam. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have a number of lectures. Firstly, we talk about what is IAM, then we start looking at the components and elements that build up the service, such as users, groups, and roles. We look at IAM policies, how to create them, how to construct them, the syntax around that, how to configure multi-factor authentication and when to use it. There's a lecture there on identity federation, which is what I spoke about a few minutes ago, about using your Active Directory accounts to federate access within your AWS resources. So within each of the courses, it's broken down at quite a deep level to allow you to understand all the elements you need to pass the security exam. So if we can just go back a step there, Andy. And what we like to do as well within the learning path is include as many hands-on labs as possible, because not everyone has the opportunity or chance to get hands-on exposure to a lot of these services, especially some of the more specialized ones such as Amazon Guard Duty or KMS, etc. So
Mm.
by using the hands-on labs, it really gives you an opportunity to use these services in a completely safe environment. So it's on, we generate the environment, it's on our AWS account, so there's no additional expense to you guys. And it gives you a step-by-step process on how to use the service and complete a particular task. So the learning path is about 33 steps. So it's built up of courses and labs. So like I say, the first section talks about identity and access management, authentication and authorization. The next set of courses and labs focuses on a range of security services relating to auditing and compliance, such as AWS CloudTrail. Again,
Yeah.
we have another lab there, how to use CloudTrail with CloudWatch to monitor specific events. Following that section, we then have a number of courses on monitoring and logging, which is quite a big element within the security service.
Yeah,
And within,
I might just add, Stu, these are really, really good courses. All right, these will give you the knowledge you know to be a good security practitioner. It's not just glossing over the topic to give you just enough to pass or anything like that. This is about helping you be good at your roles. All right, so the courses are really well put together. Stuart's done a fantastic job of building this content, and the labs go hand in hand with the content so that you get a good opportunity to just try out a lot of these rules and configurations yourself. And honestly, I think that's the way that you really master this topic. You know, if you haven't had 5 years experience working in a security role, in an infrastructure role, or in any other, you know, if you're new to security even, these labs combined with these courses will give you that experience. You've got the opportunity to take them beyond what's just outlined in this curriculum, because we're constantly referring to other areas if you wish to learn more. So it's really a comprehensive way for you to become a security expert.
I just want to make one other point as well, Andy. There was a course there with regards to AWS config, and the
Yeah,
title was AWS config an introduction.
yeah,
So it's not a beginner level course. It provides an introduction to the service, as if you've never used the service before, but then it dives deeper and deeper and deeper as the lectures go on. So it really enables you to understand it at quite a deep level, from not knowing what the service is used for to start with, to really understand how to configure under the hood of AWS config. So
yeah.
it gives you more than enough knowledge to go into the exam prepared for this and more.
And it's really important that you understand these services. Like, these are the ones that make the difference between a half-done security policy and actually having a mitigation strategy that's based on, you know, monitoring data, having rules and triggers set up to create automated alerts and events that can help you mitigate any risk. And if you understand these tools properly and you can work them together, like use them together to create solutions, you're going to find yourself in a much more knowledgeable position.
So following the monitoring and logging element of the learning path, then focus on key management and encryption mechanisms.
Yeah.
So here we talk about KMS and how to use other services for encryption. I think it's just a little bit further down there, Andy.
Yeah, I just like looking at the guard duty course, because, you know, this like how committed Stuart and his team are to making sure that you've got the latest access to training on the latest tools. So guard duty is a new service from AWS, and it's included in here. It helps you learn how to use this together with other services to create more secure environments. Here we go. See, this is great content. There we are. We're at the KMS stage.
There you go. That's step 20. So there's quite a lot of courses and labs before we get to encryption. So yeah, so we have a course here on KMS, and also a hands-on lab as well that will show you how to use KMS to encrypt S3 objects and EBS data as well. And Andy's mentioned a few times about Cloud HSM. So we have a course that goes into detail on how to use Cloud HSM, what it is, the components of it, etc. And then we have a number of courses on application and network infrastructure security. So how to protect your web applications. You can see there we have a course on web application firewall. There's courses on VPC, on creating subnets and routing, making sure that's all configured correctly for securing your subnets. And again, we have a lab there. So that, as Andy said, that the lab's going hand in hand with the courses. So you can learn the theory behind it and then kind of get hands-on with the dirty work to see how it's put together and give it a go yourself, which is great.
Fantastic course. This virtual private cloud subnets and routing course is really good. It gives you the depth of understanding you need. Plus, there's more if you want to go deeper on BGP or how VPN peering works or anything outside of the scope of this. It's there, but this course will give you a very, very solid understanding of how to basically secure and or protect your VPC.
And then the final kind of section within the learning path, we just look at some security best practices and governance and risk. So it just gives you a kind of a closure to security as a whole. So like I say, there's 30 plus steps within this learning path. And then as changes happen within the AWS field, as we know, they're always bringing out new content, always bringing out new features, new techniques. This learning path over time will grow to ensure that your security knowledge stays at the top.
Yeah, it's a comprehensive security best practice guide. That's what I like to think about this learning path. And Stuart's worked very, very hard on making sure we cover all the edge cases that we've experienced in preparing and setting this exam. We like to help you become better at your job. It's not just about passing the security certification, but that is a good benchmark. As I said earlier, it's a good way of showing your expertise. But security is an ongoing business. It's not something that you can basically do once and then forget. You need to be constantly keeping up to date, and that's why it's a very, very, very worthy certification to put some effort into. I mean, if you've been thinking about doing a professional level certification, but you're not sure if it's worth your time or the investment seems like something you just not sure if you're going to get return from, well, now's the time to do this one, because there isn't a business out there that won't see value in having a certified practitioner working for or with them. All right, it's just the baseline. It's table stakes with cloud services. Security is table stakes. Get into this one. It's a great certification, and you'll love the content. It's comprehensive. It may look like a lot when we're going through it like this. Okay, sure, there's a lot you need to know, but you can take this at your own pace. Like, we've assembled it in an order which we think will best suit your learning, but you may have more experience in some areas than others. So you're more than welcome to jump and change around. You can do some lectures at a different speed, even if you like. Like, if there's some areas that you just want to brush up on, say VPC security, you feel comfortable with that, we'll just run it at double speed, get the lecture halfway, at half the speed basically, or twice the speed, and so half the time. You'll get the key facts from it, do the labs that'll brush up your skills, and then focus on the areas that you think you don't know so much about. We also have some great skill assessments which make it easy for you to just quickly test how ready you are in these areas, in security, in the services themselves. That's a very, very powerful tool as well for just helping you identify which areas you may need to work on. Now, we also have a practice exam. This learning path will be released on Friday. We're just giving you a sneak preview of it right now. It's all ready to go. We're just finalizing the exam. That exam helps you get ready. It's basically the same number of questions that are in the exam itself. So it's a kind of exam pressure situation, which helps you, just get ready and get used to answering the type of questions that you're going to experience. The format, you can get better at that by practicing. And I think most importantly, will help you highlight the areas that you may need to do more work on. And you can come back and refocus on certain aspects of the learning path to do that. So we should just skip now into the must, shoulds, and coulds, Stuart, because I think these are our personal observations, and having worked with a lot of people and helping them get ready for certifications over the years, these are the things that we just really think you just need to focus on, all right? So in the must bucket, this is the things that, do not skip these. All right. So first of all, make sure you complete the entire learning path. Now, I've just suggested that you skip around and choose things if you feel like you're at a level where some areas you've already covered, but do make sure you don't just skip things and expect to know that, or be prepared enough in the exam. Like it's well worth you doing the whole thing. And like I suggested, just do it at double time if you feel comfortable with the topic already, but you're not totally sure on it. Do it at double time and make sure you cover it.
Yeah,
Now,
because you might be familiar with some of those services, but a lot of these courses have been designed to look at it from a security stance. So
yeah,
there might be elements of the service that you're not too aware of that you might need for the exam. So,
yeah.
like Andy said, you can go through the course double time, and if there's something that crops up there on the screen, you think, oh, I'm not too sure about this, then it allows you to pick up on that security knowledge.
Yeah, I really felt like, and when I did the beta, I really felt pushed on the edge of some areas that I just felt I knew quite well. But because the use cases were so specific, I really went back wishing I could do more, and that really helped us fuel how we built this learning path in the first instance. Now, that said, we spent a lot of time pulling this together, and Stuart's worked very hard on making sure that we've got a comprehensive learning path with the knowledge that you need. But there's always going to be other influences. With security, it's not just about knowing one thing, it's about being aware of everything that's going on. So make sure you're up to date with the white papers that are listed in and around the exam blueprint. All right, there's always going to be edge cases that crop up. And of course, you need to be diligent in keeping up with the security blogs and all of the latest threats and anything that's related to the security community. And really get as much hands-on experience as you can using IAM, CloudWatch, CloudTrail, Config, and KMS. Again, these are services that you may not use on a day-to-day basis. So the labs will give you the exposure to those and help you think through how to use these services together to solve business problems. All right, so that's the must. Do those, okay? Now, the things that you should do, all right, so take the practice exam as a good way of just sharpening yourself and get yourself prepared, as well as the test exam we have. Again, it's going to help you just prepare and ready yourself for the types of questions that you're going to come across. And really try and identify those areas that you feel a little uncomfortable on, and double down on learning in that area. Go back and do a course if you think you're not sure on it. It's going to be well worth it. There's nothing worse than sitting in an exam knowing that you should know this question, that you feel like you kind of do, but you just wish you'd read a bit more about that topic. And policies and understanding the syntax of IAM policies is really, really important. Again, don't just assume that you might be able to guess it. That this is designed to test your working knowledge of security services. All right, so you need to be able to write, read, and troubleshoot policies. Okay, so make sure you're up with that. It's not something that you can skip over. Okay, so the coulds, like the things you could do. Take the learning path more than once. There's no harm in being over prepared. This is a $300 US investment. Let's make sure you don't have to do it twice. All right. Also, I think if you do the preparation up front, you're going to feel much better about it when you pass. And make sure that you keep across all the specific topics and additional resources that come up in areas that you might feel weak on. And the breadth of coverage for the security specialty is quite broad. The first the first exam guide for the first beta was even broader. There was just probably way too much in there, which is why I think AWS went back to the drawing board and redid it. And the one they've come up with, I think, is a very, very good test of your working knowledge of these services. All right, it's going to test you. You need to know them. You can't just walk in there and expect to do it and pass. The practice exam is available. Okay, that's a could. Again, these are all just ways of preparing. We've got thousands of quiz questions on the site, so we've got over 13,000 quiz questions. You can keep retaking quizzes on cloudacademy.com to just keep preparing yourself and tempering your knowledge, making sure that you've got all of the areas covered. And the great thing is you can do those on the bus or in the car or wherever on the mobile app. You can do a 5-minute quiz just to keep refreshing yourself. All right, so let's just quickly look at some of the things that you can do to just go about preparing. All right. So first of all, define a certification plan for your team is a really good way of getting everybody excited about this certification. If you prepare together with a set plan, it makes it very, very easy. We have a thing called a training plan in the dashboard, and that makes it possible to set the courses you need to do and to monitor those. The great thing I love about it is it keeps reminding you if you haven't done a course for a week or two, then you just get prompted, and of course you go, oh, okay, I should do that. Everyone's busy, so training plans are quite good at just keeping you on top of the learning. You can set a timeline and a goal with that. You can use the skills assessment to help you just work out what your starting point is and what your strengths are. That can also help you laser focus which areas you want to focus on or double down on. And of course, you can really track your progress in the enterprise dashboard to see how everybody is going. And if someone needs some help or appears to be, losing interest, then you can motivate them and keep them interested. All right, so a couple of exam tips, and then we'll take some questions if we have time. So one of the key things I see people do wrong is to just not give themselves enough time. All right, if you're in a job, you're already busy, you're working full time for customers or for your own business. So finding time to train is something on top of what you're doing. So you need to factor that into your training plan. All right, so 4 to 6 weeks is kind of the bare minimum frame you should be looking at. If you want to be really successful, give yourself more time. Make it 8 weeks and think about doing a little bit each week, rather than trying to bite it all off in one go, get overwhelmed, and then find yourself suddenly with an exam booked and no preparation and feel bad, or worse, fail. So just try and be practical. How much time do you really have? And make sure you manage your time carefully in the exam. While I mentioned earlier, I think the questions are a little less pressured than the other professional exams with this one, where you're actually having to digest large amounts of information in a quite complex scenario and then process a number of options very quickly. You do have a little more time headroom in this exam, in my view. But that doesn't mean that you can just take your time. You've really got to manage your time carefully. Now, if you can't work out a question, if it looks just unbelievably outside of your knowledge or outside the scope of what you know, then mark it and review it and move on. Okay, you can come back and retake that question when you finish, but you're better off moving on to the next question where you might have a better chance of getting a good point, rather than spending a lot of time trying to decipher something that you just haven't got a chance of answering correctly. Now, there's definitely a little bit of rigor that can go into how you approach these questions. So first off, try and eliminate any of the obvious incorrect answers. So generally, I found that the questions are very, very detailed, and you really get yourself into a kind of to and fro over which option could be right, because they seem very similar. So try and eliminate the easy ones first, so you do give yourself time to really delve into each of the options and try and evaluate which one's correct. And remember, most of the information that you need for the answer will be given to you in the question. All right. So if there's facts about time constraints, cost constraints, or business requirements, then remember those are going to influence your answer. Okay, Stuart, are there any other things you can think of that we could help students with?
No, I think you covered it really well there, Andy.
So
I think we've only got a few minutes left. If there's any questions.
Yeah. Let's take a few.
Yeah, just a quick question. How much is the exam?
Oh, okay. Last check, please do check with your provider. So it's basically the certification exam is run by training providers or partners of AWS. So their pricing may be different, but as I understand it, the current price for the exam is $300 US.
Okay, thank you. I think we don't have any more time for other questions. So thank you to both Andy and Stuart for being with us today. And thank you all attendees for joining us. If you have any questions that wasn't answered, please reach out to us. The email at support@cloudacademy.com, or you can reach Stuart Scott via Twitter. Thank you. Until next time, we will notify you once the recording is available. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.